LinkedIn presents.
I'm Rufus Griscom, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, how to live a good life according to the world's longest study of happiness. In 1938, researchers at Harvard decided they wanted an answer, finally, to one of life's enduring mysteries. What makes us happy? They certainly weren't the first to ask this question. In the 6th century BCE, Hindu sages spoke about ananta, inner joy, a state that, for most people, was always just out of reach. A few centuries later, and a few thousand miles away, Aristotle chimed in, coining the term eudaimonia, by which he meant fulfillment, living well, flourishing. He saw this as the pinnacle of human achievement, sought by many, reached by few. So this question, what makes us happy, is not an easy one to answer philosophically, let alone scientifically, which meant that those researchers at Harvard in 1938 had to come up with a unique way to study it. In the end, they did this by looking in their own backyard. They recruited 268 Harvard sophomores, all men, all white, who agreed to let the researchers follow them for the rest of their lives. After the Harvard boys left Cambridge, the researchers gave them physicals and sent them questionnaires. When they went off to fight in World War II, the researchers interviewed them about it. When some achieved great things, for example, one of the study's participants, a sickly kid with a funny accent, became President of the United States, the researchers made note. When others became schizophrenics or alcoholics, the researchers put it in their files. Eventually, the control group grew. The researchers added a few hundred men from inner-city Boston. Then, wives and children. Years ticked by, then decades, until finally an answer to that question, what makes us happy, emerged from the mist. The answer, contrary to popular belief, isn't how much money you make or how famous you are. It has nothing to do with high IQ or low cholesterol. The answer, as one of the study's investigators put it, is that happiness is love, full stop. Our relationships are what make us happy and healthy. If you want to achieve ananta or eudaimonia, look after your relationships. The better your friendships and the stronger your marriage, the longer you will live. But here's the rub. Having good relationships is easier said than done. Happy marriages and deep friendships, these things take work. Not only that, we don't get much instruction on how to cultivate them. You can hire a personal trainer to whip you into shape or a nutritionist to spruce up your diet. But who do you turn to for sensible advice on how to actively nurture your relationships? This week, we're turning to Marc Schulz. He's a professor of psychology at Bryn Mawr College and the associate director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. That's what the 85-year-old study I've been telling you about is called, the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Marc co-wrote a book recently called The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. And he's here to share some of its biggest findings. The interview you're about to hear was conducted by my colleague Michael Kovnat, and it first appeared in a slightly different form on our sister podcast, The Next Big Idea Daily, which Michael hosts. If you'd like a daily dose of wisdom and insight while walking your dog or sipping your morning latte, then The Next Big Idea Daily is for you. Follow it wherever you get your podcasts. All right, with that, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll hear Michael's conversation with Marc Schulz.
Hi, I'm DC Marshall.
Hi, I'm Mita Malik.
We are the co-host of the Brown Table Talk podcast, where we discuss how to help women of color thrive in their workplaces.
And we invite allies to join us to help women of color win at work. We have a seat waiting for you. Subscribe to Brown Table Talk wherever you enjoy podcasts.
Marc Schulz, welcome to the Next Big Idea Daily. We're really excited to have you on the podcast.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
We don't have to get into a huge biography here, but why don't you just start by giving me a little bit about your background and how you came to the Harvard study?
So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and after graduate school, I started working on another longitudinal study, which followed folks from adolescence into adulthood and became kind of really engaged and appreciative of all of the things that we can learn by following people very closely across time. I had done work actually in another longitudinal study when I was in graduate school. So about 20 years ago, Bob Waldinger, my close colleague who I wrote The Good Life with, was invited to take over the Harvard study of adult development, which is really the foundation for our book. And he brought me along with him. And it was an opportunity we were very excited about. This is probably the longest in-depth study of human development across the lifespan. So that's how I became involved in the research that the book is based on.
And why don't you just tell me quickly what a longitudinal study is and how it differs from other kinds?
Yeah, it's a really important question. So we often contrast in science the difference between a cross-sectional study and a longitudinal study. So if we were interested in how marriages change across the lifespan, we could ask people of different ages or different lengths of marriage. So 20 years in, what does marriage look like? 40 years in, 60 years. And we would be asking that of different people. Whereas a longitudinal study actually follows the same people across time. And the best longitudinal studies do this prospectively as time unfolds. So in our study, started in the 1930s, we followed people from adolescence through adulthood to the end of their life, the same people across time. So it allows us to really understand change and what factors shape people's lives at different points in their life. Huge scientific advantages to following people across time in this way.
Obviously, a lot more difficult to do, more commitment of time and money, resources. So I assume they're a less common kind of study. Is that right?
Absolutely. So a study like this has involved a huge commitment of 4 generations of leaders of the study. It's also been really fortunate to have funding, a little bit of luck along the way to keep it going. This is why longitudinal studies are so valuable, but they're very hard to do. Much easier to do a cross-sectional study. You can do that at one point in time. So companies that do surveys for a living, the Gallup organization, for example, could study relationships across the lifespan. They could do that in a week and get the results. A longitudinal study that follows people across their entire lives will take 85 to 100 years, like our study has taken.
Are you a fan of the series of British documentaries 7 Up that Michael Apted made?
I love those movies and what they did, and it's very similar to what we're doing. We're just doing it with many more people, and we're doing it with, the latest science to inform it from the very beginning, and that continues to this day. But love those movies, and they teach us about what life is like, and they capture our imagination by allowing us to watch how people's lives unfold. The twists and turns they take, the surprises. Really interesting to watch what people imagine their life might be like, and then to come back a few years later or decades later and see how life really turns out.
Yeah, I think they're fascinating. I'm a big fan. And as you say, it is amazing to watch the twists and turns that an actual life takes as opposed to the idea one has about one's life. Really seeing it play out is a whole other thing. You, of course, and what you're doing with this study is you're doing it with more people and you're extracting data from that. You're trying to kind of generalize and learn things from it, which is obviously not the same job as filmmakers.
I think that's right, although there's some commonality. So this is at its heart, and it's certainly a scientific study. So whatever the scientific technologies and understanding and knowledge were at the time, as the study has evolved over 85 years, it was applied. And fortunately, it's had really good leadership and good science behind it. But the task is not that different. That what's also unique about this study, the Harvard study of adult development, is that from its very beginning, it was really interested in getting into people's lives and capturing what their experience was like. So in the 1930s, they did a pretty radical thing. They went into the homes of all of the participants. They interviewed the parents. They watched the parents and the children interacting in that home. They observed the neighborhood, and they wrote down descriptions of what the neighborhood was like and the building that the participants were living in. So like filmmakers, they're trying to capture the lived experience of people. And the study continued to do that by doing regular interviews, not just depending on questionnaires, which are easier to have people fill out or less costly. So across time, this was a unique study that really tried to figure out ways to get in there and capture the lived experience. More recently, for example, we've watched them interacting with a partner, with loved ones. We observe them very closely. We record that. Sometimes we bring them into the lab and watch them navigate, for example, a stressful challenge while we're collecting physiology data, how their heart rate is doing throughout that challenge, asking them about their experience. So we're using methods that allow us to get inside their head and, of course, more recently inside their brains and their bodies. So brain scans and blood assays and things like that. So I think we see our task as not that different in some ways, at least for part of our work as filmmakers, and trying to understand what people are experiencing, what's going on in their head, what it's like to live inside their bodies and their minds.
That's fascinating. It's a place that science so rarely goes in a way, but to really try to dig into other people's life experience and learn from it is an incredible project. Maybe we could back up just a minute and you could tell me about the origins of the Harvard study of adult development. What was this thing? What was the original idea? How did it get started? Who was in it?
So this was a study that began in the late 1930s. 1938 was the official origin date, and this is in the throes of the Depression on the eve of World War II. And it actually began as two separate studies. So 724 total participants. About 2/3 of those participants were inner city boys that were growing up in Boston's poorest neighborhoods. They were mostly from immigrant families. I think about 2/3 of them came from immigrant families, living in very poor and challenging circumstances, typically in tenement buildings that were quite crowded without running water or toilets. And then sort of across town, just outside Boston, were a group that were at a more privileged point or perch in their life. These were Harvard University students. Now, this was the remaining 1/3 of those participants. And both groups were followed, as I suggested, throughout their entire lives. The two studies were separate at the beginning, but they were united by, again, a somewhat unique focus for the 1930s. They were both interested in trying to understand the circumstances that led to individuals thriving in life. So the inner city kids were growing up in very challenging circumstances. How were they? What factors were leading to those individuals overcoming some of those challenges and being able to flourish as opposed to others who struggled? The Harvard students had a leg up, certainly on those inner city boys, but there were different outcomes that they had throughout their life. So what were the factors that led to them thriving? So this was early positive psychology, if you will, very unusual focus for that time, less of a focus on sickness and problems and more of a focus on what led to flourishing.
Interesting. Is it true that John F. Kennedy was one of the original subjects?
John F. Kennedy was. That there are two participants that have kind of been outed from the study. We worked very hard to preserve the confidentiality and the anonymity of participants, really important as a way to establish trust. But Kennedy is known to be one of the participants. He was a student at Harvard during the time that the study began. And there's one other person, Ben Bradley, who is the editor of the Washington Post, who outed himself, talked about his involvement in the study. And those are the only two participants that are publicly known.
Before we get into the heart of your ideas, obviously this was a pretty limited sample of people. I believe entirely male. Is that true? And mostly white?
So at the beginning, the sample was totally male. These were inner city boys and male students at Harvard. There were no female students at Harvard at that time. And it was largely white. But what's important about that is that the study has limits, that all studies have limits. It's also limited by the particular historical cohort, that there are somewhat unique things that these participants went through in their childhood, the Depression, World War II. 91% of the college students served in World War II. So in the book, we address that by trying to think about findings that are consistent across time, across culture, across ethnicity, across gender. The Harvard study has found a lot of findings that highlight the importance of relationships. So we look particularly at the research literature when it came to how powerful relationships were for our emotional well-being and for our physical health. And the findings we talk about in The Good Life in our book are supported and buttressed by hundreds of other findings.
Right. So even though this book is sort of born out of the Harvard study, which does come from this fairly limited cohort of people, you've been able to check that against other kinds of studies that include more women, more minorities, more international samplings.
Exactly right. And I do want to say it's not a way to defend the study again, because all studies have their challenges. We did begin to incorporate the wives of original participants. And in the second generation, which includes more than 1,300 children of the original participants, it's about half female and half male. So the study is more generalizable than it was at the beginning, but we don't want to depend on any one study, particularly a study that involves 85 years of data collection. First of all, there are no other studies like it. So we need to recognize the limitations, but not throw out the value of that study. And the value is being able to watch people's lives as they unfold. But we want to bolster that in the way that you're describing by looking at other studies that have looked carefully at other kinds of populations, so that the people that we're talking about that are represented in the research are a much more diverse group than the people from just the Harvard study.
Okay, so I think now would be a good time to listen to your first big idea, and then we can talk about it afterwards.
Relationships keep us happier and healthier across the lifespan, and loneliness erodes our health. If we step back and look at all 84 years of the Harvard study and boil the findings down to a single principle for living, one life investment that is supported by similar findings across a wide variety of other studies, it would be this: good relationships keep us healthier and happier, period. And science also shows us that the absence of good relationships diminishes our health and well-being. Some specific findings: people who are more isolated than they want to be find their health declining sooner than people who feel connected to others. Lonely people also live shorter lives. Chronic loneliness increases a person's odds of death in any given year by 26%. Sadly, the sense of disconnection from others is growing. About 1 in 4 Americans report feeling lonely, and Great Britain has appointed a minister of loneliness to address what has become a major public health challenge. So if you're going to make that one choice that could best ensure your own health and happiness, science tells us that your choice should be to cultivate warm relationships.
Warm relationships. Can you say more about what that means? How do we know if our relationships are warm or not?
So I think the key here is thinking about the quality of your connections to others. And when we are talking about the importance of relationships, we're talking about a variety of relationships. I think we'll get into that some more. But across your relationships, there's some qualities that are important. Trust is an important aspect of relationships that are enlivening and increase your likelihood of experiencing happiness and health. Reciprocity, so giving and getting things in return, are important. And then there are a number of kinds of support that we get out of relationships. Relationships are incredibly important when we meet challenges in life. Friends or relatives or partners help us by helping calm us down, deal with our feelings, the challenges that come up around, uncertainty when we're facing challenge. And they may also give us good advice or call us out if we're not seeing something. But dealing with stress is only one part of what relationships give us. They remind us of our connection with other human beings, what it means to be alive and human. It gives us a sense of something larger than ourselves. It helps us figure out who we are, our sense of identity. So relationships are important in so many ways, but it's quality in relationships that's most critical. Warmth is a part of it, but that experience of support and trust also really important.
Do you have any recommendations for a way to check, like, am I calling my friends enough, or do I need to have a weekly conversation with my parents, or are there any kind of practical tips for figuring out, like, are these relationships where they need to be?
So one of the things that we asked our participants was we asked them as a simple question, but a scary one. In the middle of the night, if you're scared or worried, is there someone you can call? Is there someone you can depend on for help? And what we found is that people had varied responses. A bunch of people said, yes, here are the people I can call and I can count on. Some people said, no, there's no one in my life. Some people even said they're not sure they would use their partner in that way or rely on their partner. So that's one assessment. Does someone really have your back? And then I think it's also helpful to think about relationships in your life that you do find enlivening, that add something important to your life, that you enjoy. Are you spending enough time with in your life? And I think for those relationships that are working well, you want to reach out, let those people know that they're important to you, that you want that relationship to continue. You'd maybe like to spend more time with them and to figure out how to do that. It may be a regular occasion where you get together over coffee. It may be a regular walk. It could be a regular phone call or a Zoom call. But the key part is really reaching out, letting people know how important they are to you, and thinking about ways to make that connection more frequently.
Your first idea really is about the health impacts of loneliness. And as you say the data is kind of extraordinary that loneliness increases a person's odds of death in any given year by 26%. I mean, that's a lot. I wonder,
Yep.
Are there any other points about the health impact specifically that you came across?
So in our own study, we see consistently the ways in which relationships are connected to our physical health. So I'll just give some short examples. If we look at your relationship health with your intimate partner at age 50, that's a predictor of the quality of your aging in your 80s. And it's more important, for example, than your cholesterol at age 50. In the book, we talk about one study, which I think is particularly interesting. This was a study done by Jim Cohn at the University of Virginia, and he put people in a scanner to look at brain activity and expose them to mild sources of pain. In some conditions, people were in the scanner alone, and in other conditions, they were able to hold the hand of another individual. One of those conditions, it was the hand of someone that they loved. And what he found is that the areas of the brain that are associated with the experience of pain were modified. They were less active when people experienced pain while holding the hand of another person. So that's an example of the ways in which relationships literally get into our bodies and our brains. There are many other examples that we talk about in the book. Another example is our wounds heal quicker when we have positive
Really?
Connections with others.
That's amazing.
So we're learning more and more. It's a kind of frontier of science about how relationships get into our bodies and affect our health in ways that I think it was hard to imagine decades ago. Relationships affect the way our genes are expressed, and those genes in turn affect things like our inflammatory patterns, which are associated with physical health problems, and our ability to fight bacteria and viruses as well.
Amazing. Okay, I'm ready to listen to your second big idea.
We tend to think that once we establish friendships and intimate relationships, they will take care of themselves. But like muscles, neglected relationships atrophy. When the Harvard study participants reached their 70s and 80s, we asked them if they had any regrets. Many told us they wished they had tended to their relationships more. They talked about friends that they had lost touch with and close relatives that they wished they had spent more time with. For example, Lydia at age 78 told us, "I wish I'd spent a lot more time with my kids and less time at work." Knowing how to improve our social connections, our social fitness, isn't easy. Unlike stepping on the scale or taking a quick look in the mirror, assessing our social fitness requires a bit more sustained self-reflection. It requires stepping back from the distractions of modern life, taking stock of our relationships, and being honest with ourselves about where we're devoting our time and whether we are tending to the connections that help us thrive. It also means asking ourselves what we find challenging in relationships and beginning to make a commitment to doing better.
I'm intrigued by this idea of social fitness. I mean, I was just talking about how many of us are obsessed with tracking our physical fitness. You know, my Apple Watch is all over it and telling me how many steps I've done and how many calories I've burned. A lot of people track their nutrition, their diet, they track their sleep, but we don't have a lot of great tech tools, I don't think, right now for tracking our relationships. I mean, I keep wanting there to be a thing on my watch where it tells me how much time I've spent talking to friends or laughing. Maybe that's coming. Maybe AI can help get us there. Until then, do you have any ways that you yourself measure your relationships or decide whether they need work or not?
So first I want to say, it's a great idea that you're describing, this idea about using technology to track our social fitness. And I think there are people working on this. So just like we have watches that track our fitness, our physical fitness, or our heart rate throughout the day, people are working on harnessing technology to encourage us, to nudge us towards more social connection. And to the first step in kind of just like we do in fitness, you want to reward yourself for getting to that gym every day or spending an extra 10 minutes exercising. There are ways that we can harness technology to encourage us to lean into our connections, to spend more time. There are even technologies out there right now that are relevant to this. So, a number of devices have non-distraction periods, right? So when I'm talking to you, I shut off my phone. It says we won't, notify you with any notifications. And you can do that when you're with someone who's important to you. You can really give them your attention. So technology can be harnessed. I think we will see the introduction of some technologies in coming years that should help nudge us more towards social fitness.
Marc, can you just tell me something you've done in your own life to kind of track or measure your social fitness?
Yeah, so I have a calendar that when I look at it, sometimes I get anxious. I get kind of nervous and surprised at how many hours I have booked in my schedule. But I work really hard, even when I'm at my busiest, to make sure that I have some downtime between appointments, that I'm not rushing from one Zoom call to another. And that downtime is intentional. It gives me a break, but I often use it to connect with others. So I might leave my office, go downstairs to check the mail in the mailroom or to get some water at the water cooler. And inevitably, I'm going to meet someone who's doing the same. So it's an opportunity to say hello to a colleague, to a student that may be in the building, that I intentionally plan my day with some downtime in my schedule because I find it healthy for me, and it also is a way to connect with others. The same peak at my schedule, I'm thinking about, okay, where am I getting in my social time? Am I going to see buddies that I make through playing tennis? Is that going to be part of my week? Am I going to have a walk with a friend? Do I have a point in my schedule where I can make sure that that friend that we've been talking about doing something together, that I'm going to fit that in? So a calendar, which can be overwhelming, and most of us, when we look at our calendars these days, we think about, work is taking up so much of my time. There are also opportunities in there to identify those windows, those precious opportunities that you can use to make the kinds of connections, both with existing friends. And that downtime idea, I think, is so important as well. How can I just use some informal time, maybe even before a meeting, get there early? You can do this on Zoom as well. There are always people that are connecting early just to catch up and to say, oh, that's an interesting shirt you're wearing. What's that shirt about? It looks like it has something on it. I can't quite see it in the Zoom window. So it's that opportunity to make those connections, both with, again, existing folks that you know and have regular communication with, but maybe folks that you just need that informal time to connect a little bit more.
Well, I'm sure you are wearing an interesting shirt, Marc, and I'm sorry we didn't set aside more time to chat about it. Another thing I found really intriguing in your book is the idea that something that happened in this study is not just that you were measuring these people's happiness and well-being, but by the very fact of having them reflect on their lives periodically, that itself might have been part of what made them happy. Is that true? And if so, should we be all doing our own version of this Harvard study on ourselves and reflecting more, journaling more?
We asked our participants directly. We said, what has the experience of being part of the study, what impact has that had on your life? And we asked it because we were curious. We were also worried about the amount of time that they've spent doing this. And most of the participants talked about how, they didn't use the word enjoyable, but how meaningful the experience was for them. And oftentimes they focused on this opportunity to reflect on their experiences. So the questionnaires were coming every 2 years, interviews about every 10 years over the course of the study, that they appreciated this opportunity to check in, to think more broadly about their experience. For some of these participants, again, these were men that were born in the 30s. This was an opportunity to talk about challenges or things in their life that they didn't talk about with anyone else in their life, even their partners. So I think this experience was quite meaningful to people. And I also think the idea that they were doing something that wasn't just about themselves, that maybe might help other people live meaningful lives and to flourish, that was an important idea that motivated their participation in the study. So part of the idea behind the book was to bring these kinds of check-ins, the opportunities to reflect about your experience, to bring those to people who aren't in the study, to allow all people to benefit from this moment of reflection and examination of their life.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Why don't we go ahead and listen to your next big idea?
Relationships of all kinds matter, but all relationships come with challenges. You do not need to be married to reap the benefits of relationships and live a good life. An intimate partnership can bring great joy, but we get benefits from all types of relationships. Close friendships, connections with relatives, parents, aunts, cousins, kids, people we work with, and even casual relationships like the person we see on the bus on the way to work, or the person who delivers our mail. The fact is that relationships serve so many functions and help us in so many ways that we are unlikely to get all we need from one person. While it is clear that relationships are critical for our well-being, many of us struggle with aspects of relationships. This is not that surprising. Relationships are often messy and challenging and unpredictable. Differences of opinion or preference are almost inevitable in relationships, as are feelings of disappointment or vulnerability. Relationships, like life itself, are complicated. They come with joy and challenge, love but also pain. It is almost impossible to have one without the other. A good life, in fact, is forged from precisely the things that make it hard. Challenges are opportunities for growth. Learning how to navigate relationship challenges better is key.
Relationships are messy and difficult. And I think your book is a great reminder that that's okay. And there's a great value in pushing through that discomfort and difficulty. How do we do that? How do we dive into the mess of difficult relationships?
Well, I think the first step is really recognizing that all of us experience challenges in relationships, that by their very nature, they're hard to control, that people are unpredictable. We change. If we think about a relationship between two people, we might have important differences that we bring to that relationship. Each of us is changing over time. So relationships inevitably are going to involve a difference of opinion. There are going to be conflicts that arise. Feelings are likely to be hurt. Relationships are certainly messy, but they also give us so much. We benefit from them in so many ways that the risk that we take in relationships is certainly worth it. But recognizing that all people experience those challenges is a helpful first step. It makes us feel like we're normal, that this isn't unusual. If we experience those challenges in a very close relationship, like our intimate partnership, our marriage, we may, when we're younger, initially feel like, well, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this is the wrong person. Maybe we're not going to work this out. Really helpful to recognize that most people experience challenges. Most relationships are filled with challenges. If they're not now, they might be in the future. So I think that's a critical first step, as you're suggesting.
And also in this idea, you say that you don't need to be married to be happy. I'm curious, did you find that people who were in intimate relationships were happier on average?
I think what we find is that to be satisfied in your life, you don't need to have a single intimate relationship with a partner, a traditional marriage, that people thrive under all sorts of circumstances. In our modern world, people are exploring new ways of experiencing intimacy across a variety of relationships. And many people who have been married, been in a traditional relationship, have struggled in that relationship. It hasn't been particularly happy, or it's ended in separation or divorce. And what we find from our study, and other studies find this as well, is that the benefits that we can derive from relationships, we can get from a variety of relationships. It doesn't have to be an intimate marital relationship.
It actually made me wonder sort of the reverse of that question. Is it possible to be too attached to your romantic partner so that you isolate yourself from other kinds of friendships? Did you notice that pattern ever?
Yeah. So what we find, and this is work that's been done by Eli Finkel, he has this idea about the all or nothing marriage, that if you look across the 20th century in particular, people became increasingly reliant on the person next to them, their intimate relationship, for all sorts of functions of relationships. So not only for intimacy and sexual experience, life advice or career advice, or managing different aspects of our social life, that increasingly we put all of the things that we get in relationships, we put the responsibility for them on our intimate relationship. And I think that that's a challenge for people, that we may be expecting too much from one person. So it's very clear that if we can spread some of the good things that we get out of relationships to more than one person, that there's some strategic advantages to that. That if we have friends that can also step in and help us, or friends that have particular areas of expertise that we can rely on for a path through a challenge, or figuring out a particular problem that we've had trouble solving, that there are advantages to that. So this idea about total immersion or total dependence on one relationship can lead to challenges for some people, but some people are able to make it work. They're lucky enough to have a partnership that flourishes even with the expectations that we put on them for all of those contributions to our life. Right.
As you say, relationships serve so many functions that it's unlikely that we'd get all we need from one person, but it's not impossible.
Exactly.
There might be someone who can really do it, but on average, I think we're probably best off with a variety of kinds of friendships.
I was just going to add, Michael, that if we look at research, what we see is that the quality of relationships matters in terms of our health and our happiness. But there's also research that suggests the quantity of connections that we have also matters, that people with more connections, more quality connections, also thrive in ways that people with fewer connections don't. Obviously, the most important thing is going from no connections, people are completely isolated and feel lonely, to one or two. But part of the reason why there may be benefits to more relationships is spreading that responsibility for all the things that relationships give us across more than one or two or several relationships.
Our attention is our most precious resource. How should we spend our time and attention? Because of the brevity and uncertainty of life, this is a question that has profound implications for our health and happiness. There is a Buddhist mantra that goes like this: if only death is certain and the time of death is uncertain, then what should I do? Think for a moment about a friend or relative you cherish, but don't spend as much time with as you would like. Now think about how often you see that person. Every week, once a month, once a year. You can do the math and project how many hours in a single year you think you spend with this person. Whenever that number is, contrast it with the amount of time that the average person spends today on screens. In 2018, Americans spent an astonishing 11 hours every day interacting with media, from television to radio to smartphones. From the age of 40 to the age of 80, that adds up to 18 years of waking life. You can decide to whom and to what you give your attention. With one thoughtful question at a time, one moment of devoted, authentic attention at a time, you strengthen the foundation of a good life.
Let's talk about social media, because obviously this is a big distraction, something that keeps us in some ways from our friends. But on the other hand, it can be a great way to stay connected to people you might not otherwise interact with all that much. And in some cases, it's a great way for people who might be isolated to find like-minded connections. So how do you think about social media's role in this?
So I think when we think about the role of technology more generally and social media more specifically in how we connect with others, it's really complicated. That it, on the one hand, it has the capacity for connecting us across distance if we're physically distant from people. During the pandemic, it was incredibly important when we were socially isolating from each other. If we grow up in a community, for example, a rural community in which we feel like there's no one who's like us because of some important aspect of our identity, or maybe we have a medical illness that no one else in my town has, the internet is incredibly useful in connecting you with other people so you don't feel as alone. On the other hand, technology, like it's all technologies, but our modern technologies of communication and social media have the potential for a negative impact on our connections with others. So what we're finding in our research, and other researchers have found the same thing, is the less lifelike the technology is in terms of its ability to communicate cues and emotions, that people don't feel as close a connection. So if you text a person, emotions aren't as strong typically as they might be in a video-mediated communication. The cues that we rely on for connection, synchrony of our bodily, of our body language, nods of a head that we use to communicate that we're listening to people, a smile that we might add when we are trying to express sympathy or amusement that we share with a person, that those cues are muted in many of the technologies that we use for communication. So I think we need to think about both the immediate consequences of that. What does it mean when we don't have those same cues and emotions? Emotions turn out to be a glue that bring us together. So what's the consequence of that for work teams, for example, over time? And we also need to think about the longer term consequences. So one of the questions we're now trying to study with the second generation of participants and other groups are interested in is, what are the developmental consequences of growing up as an adolescent and having so much of your communication with peers be online or mediated via these different kinds of technologies that often involve a very different temporal rhythm than our typical connections or interactions with people. So if I'm experiencing strong emotions and I'm texting, it's very different than if I'm with you in person in real time, having to deal with those emotions. And inevitably, we will be in person in real time with other people, experiencing differences, experiencing strong emotions. So we're curious about the developmental consequences of growing up in a period of time in which a lot of that communication is technology mediated.
Yeah, so maybe there's a place for it, for this technology in our relationships, but we need to be careful it's not taking over.
It's absolutely right. And I want to be clear that they're real strengths. So, reaching out right now as you're listening to this as a listener and telling someone that you're thinking about them, that you want to connect, that you're thinking about how important the connections are in your life. It's a great text. I've been getting texts as I've been talking about the book from old friends that I haven't, talked to in quite a while. It's a wonderful way of communicating, but it's when it becomes our exclusive way of communicating that we may have more challenges.
Yeah, and that's another great point you make in this idea. You say, with one thoughtful question at a time, one moment of devoted, authentic attention at a time, you strengthen the foundation of a good life. I love that attention to the kind of small, the granular detail of how to foster these good relationships. I mean, the word relationship is kind of a big, ugly, daunting word. But when you think about just asking someone a question, just telling someone that you're thinking about them. It doesn't take that much to keep these relationships healthy. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And in our modern life, there's so many things that are grabbing for our attention. Social media is a very important one, where the money that many of these social media companies are making really depends on getting our attention. So they're really good at it. And we have to kind of push against that tide to really focus our attention on the things that are really critical and important to us. So being present when we're talking to someone, giving them our full attention, it's really a gift. And in the book, we talk a lot about how attention and presence in many ways is our most precious resource, more important than money. It's something that is not inexhaustible, that we need to figure out ways to harness it for the things that are most important in our life. And some of it is very simple, the kinds of ideas that you're talking about, texting someone, really sitting down, being curious, giving people our full attention. For some of us, that's quite a remarkable experience when we're sitting opposite someone who's, really wanting to take in what we're telling them and listening to us. It's kind of magical because it doesn't happen often enough in most of our lives.
Hey folks, Rufus here. If you're a fan of our interviews with physicians, scientists, or entrepreneurs, then I have the perfect podcast recommendation for you, Raising Health. Previously called BioEats World, Raising Health comes from leading venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z. Each episode, Raising Health dives deep into the heart of healthcare, biotech, and AI with A16Z General Partners. Along the way, they explore the real challenges and opportunities in health and biotech entrepreneurship. Not to mention, you'll hear raw insights and actionable advice from notable guests like Omada CEO and co-founder Sean Duffy, and AI expert and In-Sitro CEO Daphne Kohler. Don't miss out. Follow Raising Health wherever you get your podcasts.
So let's jump to your final big idea, which is it's never too late to improve your connections with others.
Andrew Deering lived one of the most difficult and isolated lives of any study participant. As a child, Andrew's family moved a lot, and he didn't develop any lasting friends. His struggles with meaningful connections continued even after getting married in his 30s. When asked in his mid-60s to describe his closest friends in life and what they had meant to him, Andrew wrote simply, "No one." When Andrew was 67, he was forced by health problems to retire from a job that was one of the few sources of pleasure and connection in his life. Around that same time, he decided to end his marriage. He was lonelier than ever. He decided to start going to a gym near his house. 3 months later, Andrew knew everyone at the club and looked forward to seeing them when he visited. He also discovered that a few of them shared a love for old movies, and they started getting together to watch movies. When we checked in with Andrew in his 80s, we asked how often he left his home to see others or had people visit him. He told us daily, quite a change from his earlier answer of never. We live in a world that hungers for greater human connection. Sometimes we might feel that we are adrift in life, that we're alone, and that we're past the point where we can do anything to change that. Andrew had felt this way for a long time, but he was wrong. It wasn't too late, because the truth is, it's never too late.
I think we all know what you're talking about here. The idea that when we're kids, when we're in school, it's easy to make friends. When we're in college, it's easy to make friends. When we have kids that are in school, that can be a way to make friends. But in general, as one gets older, it can be tricky to make new friends and to keep old friendships alive. Do you agree with that?
So I think that's right. As we age, our social networks often get smaller. When we retire, one of the big challenges, which I think is underappreciated when people think about retirement, is rebuilding our connections with others, having a life that's filled with important connections that, again, enliven us and help us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. So people who are successful at retiring, they find new sources of meaning and purpose, but they also find new playmates. They find connections with others that are important to them. Oftentimes it's through an activity. So one can think about volunteering or spending time with others in recreation. It might be pickleball or walking. Those are great activities because we know that repeated contact with people over time leads to new friendships. That's how friendships develop. But this idea of being physically isolated can be true at any age. So one of the really striking things in the loneliness data is that young people, college students, report some of the highest rates of loneliness, despite the fact that they're living in close proximity with many other people like them engaged in a similar activity. But their experience, their subjective experience, is that people don't know them, that people don't have their back. They feel socially isolated. They feel a sense of disconnection with others. So it's critical to remember it's not just about physical proximity. It's about the ways in which those connections unfold and the way that we experience them inside of us, whether we feel like people are they have our back, they know who we are, they're interested in our well-being. That's a key part of the experience at any age. So we need to think about this at all points in our life, points of transition. It's particularly important. What are the ways that we can maximize our connections with others? What can we do to get out of the house and be with other people in a way that will make it likely that we have friends and connections that are important to us? So looking for those forks in the road, which transitions often present, which of those paths forward might allow us to have lives that are filled with meaningful connections. And just the presence of other people in our life.
Yeah, I think I'll take this moment to give a shout out to my parents who are they're in their 80s. They're part of 2 or maybe 3 different book clubs. My dad does I believe, monthly call with his high school friends. They still check in with each other once a month. They have walking groups, and they've really managed to keep very active social lives. But I think it's been very intentional on their part, and it's impressive. And I'm planning on modeling myself after them.
Well, I was just going to say, so wonderful for them, and what an important model for you, right? I mean, that's a gift to give your children. When you know people like that, whether they're your parents or friends that are modeling that kind of good behavior and the way that they prioritize connections, that's a gift for all of us.
It got me thinking some of what they're doing it falls into the category of sort of lifelong learning, through their book group and some of these other things. And I think you mentioned, like Andrew Deering, who you talk about, he started making friends when he started going to the gym. So the relationships are part of it, but I'm wondering, like, in this study, obviously the main takeaway of the Harvard study is relationships are the most important. But are there any other things besides relationships, maybe connected, like learning, like health and fitness that jump to the front?
Of course. So there are many lessons from 85 years of research and hundreds of studies. So, your health behaviors matter. Exercising is important. Going to a doctor regularly. Smoking is not good for you. Drinking alcohol in excess is not good for you. We've talked a little bit about this idea in the book of how we deal with adversity and challenge is also really critical. So it's our coping strategies or style about how we navigate through challenges and stress are really important. And there is this idea, you were asking about lifelong learning, and I think it's connected to one of the things that relationships at their best do for us. So if we're connected to other people, they expose us to new ideas. If we have a particularly close relationship, we often use that relationship as a base to explore things that maybe we're a little bit afraid about. Maybe we won't be good at it, or we won't do it well, or we won't like it. But if we have a kind of secure base, we have a friend or a relationship in which we feel safe, and that person encourages us or holds our hand as we begin to do this. And I'm not talking about skydiving. I'm talking about maybe it's dancing or taking up voice lessons or an activity that you're always curious about doing. That good relationships encourage us to think about growth, encourage us to think about learning new ideas, new actions, new skills, all of those things. So I think the example with your parents, it comes with kind of 2 great benefits. They're continuing to learn and grow, which makes us feel alive, and they're doing it in a way that connects them with others. book groups are a perfect, a really terrific example of that.
Yes, or even next big idea clubs like the one we're running.
I was going to
here.
say that, so I'm a lifelong educator, and I love it when people come together in groups to learn and to grow. So I think organizations and structures that promote that kind of engagement around learning new skills or taking in new knowledge or talking about ideas, so important as a way to bring people together.
Well, Marc, I hope this prompts myself and our listeners to pay more attention to their relationships. I really appreciate the work that you do, and thank you very much for coming on our show.
It was a real pleasure, Michael. I appreciated your thoughtful questions, and it was fun to talk with you.
Marc Schulz's new book is The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. Grab a copy wherever books are sold. And if you can't get enough of Michael Kavnat's soothing baritone, do yourself a favor and subscribe to his podcast, The Next Big Idea Daily. This week, he's diving into the history of exercise, the origins of the breast pump, the merits of learning a new language, and more. Follow The Next Big Idea Daily on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Today's episode was produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound designed by Mike Toda. We look forward to actively nurturing our relationship with the good folks at the LinkedIn Podcast Network in 2024. I'm Rufus Griscom. See you next week.